Welcome to this online lecture video for Understanding Project Management, a Practical Guide, Chapter 5, Schedule Planning. So the project lifecycle, we're moving our way through the planning phase. So for this video is on the important topic of schedule planning. The agenda for this video are three. What are the activities of the project? When will the activities be performed? And finally, an introduction to critical path analysis. Now, in terms of what are the activities of the project, recall that during scope planning, the project was broken down into a number of deliverables, each representing a part of the project to be delivered. The deliverables are broken down into smaller and smaller deliverables as part of that process. The smallest deliverable is called a work package, or they are called work packages. Each deliverable or work package is a noun. That is a thing that is produced. During schedule planning, for each work package, the activities needed to create the work package are then defined. Each activity is a verb. That is an action that is performed. So as you move from scope planning, which is noun or things, deliverables, and as you move in planning, where you define activities for each work package, you're defining verbs of actions that are performed, and that is the process. So remember this relationship. Projects are broken down into deliverables that are nouns. Deliverables are further broken down into smaller deliverables and ultimately work packages that are also nouns. And work packages are then broken down into activities that are verbs. If you understand this relationship, that is an important step in terms of schedule planning. Now, there's always a question of, for each work package, how many activities should be defined? So what is the answer to that? For example, if we had a work package final report, let's say we had a project that had a final report, should there be a small number of activities? For example, create draft report, create final report? Or should it be a larger number? For example, perform research, create draft copy, perform edits, proofread report, create final report. So should you have two, or should you have five, or some other number? That is the question. So it's important to understand the factors that should be considered. Certainly the complexity of the work package, how intricate the work is. If it's highly complex, that would lead you to have to define more activities. If it was fairly simple, less. The duration of time that the work package will likely take to complete. If it's a short period, it's probably fewer activities. If it's a longer period, probably longer or more activities. As well, the experience level of the person or team that will be working on it. If it is a highly experienced team, you would produce probably or likely less activities. If it's a very inexperienced or junior team that requires more direction, you would define more activities. Okay, let's look at the process now of creating the activity list. So we'll watch this video together.
It's Monday morning, and Sophie arrives early to the office, coffee in hand, ready to continue with the planning of the project. To refresh her memory, she reads through the draft WBS and project scope statement that she and Fatijit created last week. Sophie takes a simple approach to get started. First, she considers the list of work packages that have been documented. Next, she writes the name of each work package on a separate blank piece of paper. She titles another document Project Management. This is where she will reflect on the work necessary to manage this project. Then she brainstorms about each work package and begins to list its required activities. This helps her compartmentalize the work required to get each work package and the project management done. It's a big job. When she's finished, there will be 10 pieces of paper filled with activities, but Sophie knows she'll produce a better estimate and execute a better project as a result of her planning. After about 30 minutes, Sophie completes the activity list for the project.
Okay, so in terms of creating the activity list, we saw the project manager, Sophie, taking a fairly low-tech approach to creating the activity list, in that she was writing each work package from the previously created work breakdown structure on a piece of paper. Remember, the activity list is directly created from the work breakdown structure. This is why it's really important to have an effective work breakdown structure that represents 100% of the scope of the project. Then for each piece of paper, each work package, she then thinks of the activities needed to produce the work package. She writes these on the paper. Now, in terms of where would she get these activities, she would perhaps from her previous experience, her knowledge of the work. She could consult with others, either on the team or outside of the team, but she would come up with those activities. This approach helps her focus on each work package individually rather than trying to simultaneously consider all of the activities for the whole project. She's breaking it down and looking at each work package separately, which then will then create all of the activities for the schedule or for the project. So you can see the activity list for the case study in the textbook in chapter 5. So key idea, using the WBS as a starting point, create an activity list consisting of one or more activities for each work package. Okay, our next step is we need to estimate the activity duration. Now, the activity duration is the period of time that the activity will be executing. So it's total time available. It's not the actual amount of work that will be done. We'll talk about that later. It's the start and end of the activity. So the question is, estimating the duration of an activity can be challenging. Well, what are some of the reasons for this? Well, there are many. Estimating is difficult in general. You're trying to predict what hasn't happened yet, but sometimes it's not being familiar with how much work is involved. It might be something new that hasn't been done before. It is difficult to know if there'll be problems or issues that happen and how many issues, because you don't know. So will everything go perfectly well, or will there be problems? So we have to kind of think about that. We also may not know who is working on it at this point. So the resources, the people are persons, or the person who will be assigned to the activity, we might not know that. So experienced resources can do an activity very quickly versus inexperienced might take longer. So there's a lot of different variables that come into it that makes this a difficult task. Some of the techniques that may be used to create duration estimates, well, there are various techniques that are defined in the textbook. You can look at past projects. You can consider the work involved. You can check with others and so on to see what has been done or what their opinion on is, and so on. So there's various techniques, and those are generally true of estimating overall. The duration estimates are then added to the activity list. And you can see the updated activity list, of course, in the textbook in chapter 5. So key idea, estimate the duration for each activity. We then now need to ask the question, when will the activities be performed? The activity list itself does not define the timing. So we need to think about that. Once the activities of the project have been defined, the timing will need to be determined. This is based on either the required sequence of the work involved, which is also known as determining the dependencies between activities, or the completion of activities occurring on a certain date or dates. So those are the two options you have. One is the sequence of work, and the other is specific dates. And the first point, the sequence of work in most projects, is where most activities are defined. The timing of most activities are defined. Okay, let's watch our next video, which is determining when the activities will take place.
Sophie examines the 10 pieces of paper full of project activities. While she has captured the work to be done, she knows she needs to put the activities in some kind of order or sequence. The trade show signage activities, for example, don't all happen at the same time. So, with a pad of sticky notes in hand, Sophie takes the trade show signage work package and copies the two activities, create sign graphics / text and order banner stands, onto separate sticky notes. She does the same for the remaining pages of activities and arranges them on her office whiteboard. Next, Sophie begins to rearrange the sticky notes to put them in the order that they should be performed. Her experience with previous product launches helps her determine the correct order. For example, Sophie determines that certain activities are sequential, that is, performed in a particular order, so she arranges them as follows and draws an arrow between them. Sophie finds that there are some activities that are not related to each other and may be performed at the same time if necessary. For example, the Create SM strategy and Develop video concept activities do not need to be performed in any particular order. For these activities, an arrow is not drawn between them on the whiteboard. As Sophie arranges the sticky notes on the whiteboard, the timeline of the project is becoming clear.
Okay, during that video, Sophie realizes that the activity list is not in any particular order. So she writes the name of each activity on a sticky note and places them on her office whiteboard. Again, a low-tech solution is used here, and it can be quite effective because sticky notes can be moved really easily around a whiteboard. She then places them in order with arrows between the notes. So using an erasable marker, she can draw arrows between them and really show the order of the work. Here is an example of just two of the activities that do have an order between them. So it's evident to her that you need to create the sign graphics and text before you can order the banner stands. That is a dependency that is there. So she defines that amongst many others. This is the resulting series of activities that would be on her whiteboard. So it'd be drawn like this. This is what it would basically look like. And you can see the order of activities starting in the upper left to initiate the project, to plan the project. Then a whole series of activities may start together. And then you can see the resulting dependencies ending up in the bottom right with close the project. You can also see all the durations are present. What you just looked at is something called a network diagram. It's a useful tool for displaying the sequence of activities because it's very graphical and very obvious. Each activity is represented by a rectangle. Each arrow represents a dependency between the two activities. So key idea, when you are at the early stages of planning, creating a network diagram that demonstrates the dependencies between activities is a good idea. Okay, our next step is to now add people or human resources to the schedule. And we'll see this next step being performed.
Sophie steps back from the whiteboard to review the network diagram. Her next step is to consider the human resources who will be assigned to the project. Based on the work required for this project, she writes the following requirements on her notepad: graphic designer, communications specialist, marketing specialist, and videographer. In addition, a business analyst, Fatijit Kumar, was assigned to help plan the project scope. Sophie's expertise as project manager will also be needed throughout the project. As she adds each type of project role to each sticky note, she quickly realizes that there are going to be issues. Since many of the activities are scheduled to begin at the same time, after the plan the project activity, she will need numerous graphic designers and communication specialists. Based on her last few projects, she knows that she will only be able to secure one of each. Picking up some of the sticky notes, she starts to rearrange them into a different order.
Okay, so what we saw there is as activities will start as soon as possible, the addition of human resources causes some problems in this particular case. And that is, there were points where, based on the first network diagram that was created, we would require more of a certain skill, such as the graphic designer, than we have available. So that becomes a problem, and that's something that we need to now reconcile. So, for example, the network diagram required, in effect, 6 graphic designers to all start at the same time in order to do what was originally proposed in that first network diagram. And Sophie will only have one. This is an example of a resource constraint. Remember, way back in chapter 1, we talked about the 6 constraints, and resources are one of them. And this is something that project managers deal with all the time in terms of aligning the timing of activities to when resources are available. So this can be solved in various ways. The person, the graphic designer, could be asked to multitask, try to do 6 things at once. That's not always very practical, and it would just make each one take a lot longer. Or to, and is often done in this case, introduce additional dependencies based on the resource availability. So we now have dependencies in our network diagram that are not just based on the work, but based on the resources that are available. This is known as resource leveling. So key idea: add human resources requirements to the project schedule and use resource leveling as required to resolve overallocations. Okay, so here is the resulting network diagram after resource leveling. And if you compare this to the previous network diagram, if we were to go back and look at it, you'd see that many of the activities that were originally designed to be performed right after plan the project have been pushed further to the right of the network diagram. For example, create holographic. There's a dependency between order banner stands and create holographic cards. That dependency is only there because of resources, because the graphic designer cannot do them all at the same time. So we're stretching them out now. This has the effect of cooperating with the resources that we have, but it lengthens the duration of the project. And that's the effect of resource leveling, is that you're by introducing those dependencies, the total project duration will increase. And that's, again, the interplay between constraints, in this case, between the resource constraint and the time constraint. Okay, onwards to the project schedule. In addition to the network diagram, there are many different types of project schedules that may be used. The network diagram is a useful tool for planning, but it's not all that great for ongoing, monitoring of the project. So we have other schedule types. There is no one way to create a schedule. The amount of detail and complexity required in a schedule depends on the characteristics of the project. So we don't just have one type of schedule beyond the network diagram. There are 3 types to be discussed at this point. There is a schedule that is based on milestones, a milestone-based schedule. There's a schedule based on activities, activity-based schedule. And there is a schedule based on activities and dependencies, and that's a dependency-based schedule. So we're going to look at each one of these in order. The milestone-based schedule. Well, this is a fairly simple schedule. It's basic. It includes the milestones that were defined for the project. And as you remember, milestones are key events that occur during the project. Um, so there would be a rather small number of milestones here for the typical project. It might be 5 to 10 milestones, and it's basically tracking those key events. The advantage is it's fairly simple to do. It's easy to understand. This schedule is very accessible to team members and stakeholders because it's in Word. It would normally be in Word or Excel. The downsides is that there's not much detail. So it's the least amount of detail, which could be risky for certain projects. So it's most appropriate for smaller projects or projects that have been done repetitively and there's not a lot of risk involved in them. So this is the milestone-based schedule, and to see an example of it for the case study, you can see Chapter 5 textbook. The next type of activity is an activity-based schedule. And this is, you can see the basic format of it. Contains more details. It contains each of the activities that were previously defined in the activity list. And then you can see that we have the name of the activity, the duration, and the start and end date of the activity. So when it's going to start and end. So it has timing information. And those are things that would be derived from the network diagramming process and the definition of when things should happen based on key dates and dependencies and so on. So it's much more detailed, and you can see an example of this in the textbook. Its advantages is that it has more detail than the milestone-based schedule. There is timing information. It's also very accessible and simple to use. Stakeholders can easily access this. The key downside is that it doesn't contain the dependency information. You can't see which activities are dependent upon other activities. It is a highly used type of schedule, generally for medium-sized projects that are big enough but not overwhelmingly large. So sort of in that medium range is when you'll see these. The next and the third is the dependency-based schedule, also known as a Gantt chart. This is an approach where we can see the activity. So it is at the activity level. We can see the activities in the leftmost column being shown the duration. And then we can see there's a calendar section which shows graphically the timing of each activity represented by a bar. Milestones are represented by a diamond shape, and you can see through the arrows, you can see the dependencies between the activities. So the advantage of this approach, very detailed, shows the maximum amount of information, and is very appropriate for large complex projects where there's a high degree of risk to and so on. The downside is they're fairly complex to do. The software to create them can sometimes be complex, and not all stakeholders will necessarily have access to this because this is usually specialized software. So again, pros and cons across all three. You can see an example of a dependency-based schedule for the case study in the textbook. Pros and cons we talked about as we went through. So there are pros and cons of each one, and it really comes down to what's the characteristics of the project, how much information is needed. For example, would not necessarily it would not be a good idea to have or use a milestone-based schedule for a large, complex, high cost project. That would not be a good idea. On the other hand, you don't need to use a dependency-based schedule for a very short, simple project. That's overkill. So the idea is to right size it based upon the characteristics of the project. So key idea, there are many formats of project schedules, including network diagrams, milestone-based schedules, activity-based schedules, and dependency-based schedules. A little bit more about dependencies. What we've been seeing so far is in our network diagram are what are known as finish to start dependencies. This is where when activity A finishes, activity B may start. This is the most common type of dependency. This is the way most work is scheduled. 95, 98% of activities would fall into this. There are other types of dependencies that are worth mentioning. There are sometimes cases where two activities need to start together, that when we start activity C, then we should also start activity D, right? And that's considered a start to start dependency. Because they have different durations, they may end at different times. There's also the concept of a finish to finish dependency. This is where activities need to finish at the same time. They may start at separate times, but they need to cross the finish line to finish simultaneously. That's referred to a finish to finish dependency. So there are four dependency types: finish to start to start, finish to finish. There is one more called start to finish. Like for technically for completeness, there is a fourth. However, start to finish dependency types are extremely rare, almost never occur, and therefore are not covered in detail in this course. But it's something you can look up if you were curious as to what a start to finish dependency looks like. Okay, in addition to the dependency types, there are the concept of leads and lags. And this is how we can make our schedule even more useful for how the work will be done. There is the concept of a lead. A lead is when we overlap activities. In this case, we're showing an example of a 2-day lead. So here's activity A with a finish to start dependency. However, instead of have to be 100% complete and then activity B starts, we allow an overlap. So activity B will start when activity A is within 2 days of completion. And that's called a lead. This is often done, just the nature of work is that the work on activity A will start to decrease near the end as final checks are being done and a little bit of quality control is taking place and final checking of the work. Well, then there is additional time available to the resources working on it that they can start up on B. So it just makes the use of resources more effective. And that's one of the primary uses of a lead. There is also the concept of a lag, and this is the opposite, where there is a gap defined between activities. So again, this is a finish to start dependency, but instead of activity D immediately starting after activity C, there's a 1-day waiting period. And there can be a variety of reasons for this. It might be we're waiting on some information. There might be the work done on C needs a little time to settle or something like that. There's various reasons why it can be, but this allows scheduling to take this into account. So key idea, activity time may be affected by the amount of lead or lag defined by the project manager. Our final topic is critical path analysis. This is an overview. Just to give you an idea of what a critical path is and how it works. So the critical path is defined as the longest sequence of activities in a project schedule. This sequence then represents the earliest planned completion time for the project. So it is something, it's one of its key purposes is to figure out what's the earliest completion time for the project. So let's look at the network diagram that's shown here. It's a fairly simple network diagram, 5 activities related to preparing to leave for vacation. So you can see the dependencies there and so on. So the question is, for the following network diagram, what is the longest sequence of activities or what are referred to as paths through this network diagram? Well, in this instance, there are 2 sequences of activities or paths. There's one sequence, which is select vacation destination, apply for passport, and depart for vacation. That's one sequence. The other sequence is runs along the bottom. Select vacation destination, book vacation, pack for vacation, and depart for vacation. And that's the other one. So the definition, um, longest sequence of activities. Now, this is longest in terms of total duration, not the number of activities. So the total duration of the top path is 2 plus 10 plus 1 is 13 days. The total duration of the bottom path is 2 plus 1 plus 1, which is 5. So that means the longest sequence is select vacation destination, apply for passport, and depart for vacation. That indicates that that is the critical path, those three activities. And the planned duration is 13 days. That's something that we know through critical path analysis. Now, there's another concept, which is total float, and that's a key concept in critical path analysis. Total float is the amount of time an activity may be delayed before it delays the project end date. Remember, this network diagram has a duration of 13 days. And let's say, for the sake of argument, we really want it to be no more than 13 days. That is that we do not want it to be extended. So, so now what we need to figure out is, well, if any of these activities are delayed, does it push out our 13 days? So what we need to figure out is how much total float is contained in the activities below. Okay, so first of all, to do that, there are 5 different answers we're going to find here. Each activity contains a certain amount of total float, which is the amount of time that may be delayed before it delays the project end date. Now, a simple answer for some of the activities is that any activities on the critical path have 0 days of total float. So select vacation destination, apply for passport, and depart for vacation all contain 0 days of total float, which really means you cannot delay them. If you delay select vacation by 1 day, it'll push you out past 13 days to 14 days. If apply for passport takes 11 days instead of 10, it will delay the total project. It'll become 14 days instead of 13. And the same for depart for vacation. However, now the question becomes, well, what about these ones at the bottom, book vacation and pack for vacation? What happens there? Well, to determine this, you need to look at what is happening on the critical path while these activities take place. So if we look at those 2 activities on the bottom, book vacation and pack for vacation, they together will take 2 days because they're sequential. While that's taking place, apply for passport is taking place, 10 days. So there is 10 days of work that is needing to be done, or 10 days of duration, sorry, while we do these 2 days of book vacation and pack for vacation. So that means that book vacation has 8 extra days that you can delay. You could delay book vacation by up to 8 days, and it wouldn't have any effect on the duration of the project because there's extra time. That means book vacation has 8 days of total float. Now, the same can be said for pack for vacation. It also contains 8 days of total float. However, please keep in mind that they're sharing those 8 days, so that if book vacation was delayed by, let's say you didn't start it right away and you delayed it by 6 days, there would only be 2 days left for pack for vacation. They're sharing a pool of 8 days in this case. So that's the basic calculations. Now, this is the theory of it and so on. There, just be be aware, or just as FYI, there is software that will calculate this. So this is for awareness and how it works and so on, but there is software that will calculate this automatically. Now, why is it important to know the amount of total float? Why is this being even talked about? Well, during the execution of the project, often it's important to understand, well, if a project, if an activity is delayed, will that affect the end date? Is that important or not? So let's say hypothetically we are, you know, working on, we've selected our vacation destination, and we have two activities that are going to start at the same time, passport and book vacation. Which should you start on? If you can only do one, which would you start on? Well, if you didn't know the critical path, you might think, well, applying for passport's kind of boring. Let's book the vacation. That sounds a lot more interesting. However, that would be the wrong choice. If you did that, you would be not starting apply for passport right away, which has a total float of 0, which would delay your project end date. You would cause an increase in the overall project. So understanding the critical path allows you to focus on keeping those activities completely on schedule. And for the non-critical path activities, you will understand, well, how much time can you delay them? You know, how much extra time is there, which is very important information. Okay, there's the same concepts can be applied for larger um, uh, network diagrams and schedules. For example, what is the critical path for the case study of this project, or for the case study project, and what is the total float for each activity? For this, I would direct you to the textbook. It runs through this example completely, and you'll be able to see the answer to that. Okay, so key idea, understanding the critical path allows the project manager to determine the project total project duration and the impact of activity delays on the project's completion date. Key terminology, a lot of new key terms in this chapter. You can of course see them in the key terminology section, the references, and thanks for watching.